Morning and welcome to a stream by the ACT Chess Association of their online events, which are currently being held on mychess.org. Good news is today is the day that the ACT, Canberra, comes out of lockdown, hopefully, and people can start to gather for face-to-face activities, including chess events. So a lot of the Canberra chess clubs are starting to go back. Ungarland Chess Club is going back next Tuesday night. I think Tuggeranong is going back the following week, maybe even as early as Monday. I should check that. And Street Chess is running on Saturday. But at the same time, we're still running online events. My name is Sean Press. I organise these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. And we are still playing our online standard event, which is on Thursday nights with a time limit of 40 minutes to start with, plus 15-second increment. And today I've got a double header. I'm actually showing not one, but two games, because there are a couple of very quick games that were played last night, but I think both of them had enough interesting ideas in them that it's worth sharing. So let's get started with game number one, played by Dev Rashura, who's quite a young and up-and-coming player, against Clyde Robbins, who is a much more experienced player. And the opening will be particularly familiar to juniors. So knight g5, two knights defense. And d5 is the right move. E takes d5. And for various reasons, which I'm not entirely clear about, Clyde allowed essentially the fried liver attack here. The move to play here, by the way, is knight here, because this is known to be not so great. Every now and then, to be fair, someone tries to resurrect this line for black, thinking that maybe they can grab some stuff and hang on. And also, to be fair, it is easy for white to get confused and get this one wrong. Turned out not to be the case in this game. So the knight took on d5. And white immediately sacrificed on f7, which is the old way of playing this, and it's not a bad way of playing this. But d4 is considered a lot better. One, it's worth noting that the bishop on c1 now protects the knight from the queen, so we're not worried about losing the knight. And if we open the center up, this is going to work significantly in white's favor. The argument, the move to be played here, the argument being that after the bishop check and the pawn goes to c3 to block, the knight on b1, which wants to join in the attack via c3, can't, because essentially you've blocked that square by moving the pawn there. Bishop e7, and then we sack anyway. Knight takes, king takes, queen check, and the idea is that you're now threatening to win back the knight on d5, because you've got bishop and queen attacking it, and at the moment only the queen is defending. And king e6 is the defensive move here, and then queen e4 exclamation mark, which was discovered a number of years ago, is considered the best move. I'm not going to go too far down this line for now, because I'd be here for days. But with the king trapped in the center, white certainly has plenty of play. Having said that, knight takes f7 is okay. King takes, queen f3. But here, black went immediately wrong, and this is why the game ended pretty quickly. Surprisingly, if you've not played a lot of chess, king e6 is recommended. Normally you try not to hang on material in situations like this, but try and give it back to escape the worst. But it turns out that black's best idea is to try and grab everything and try and survive. The knight goes here to add another attacker for the knight. Note the knight can't move because the king would be in check from the bishop. Knight b4, and it does two jobs. One, it protects the knight, and two, it's threatening to take the pawn on c2. So you play queen e4 here, which does double duty. One, it pins the e-pawn, and two, it covers c2. c6 to protect the knight. a3 drives the knight back to a6. It's the only decent square. And then you try and go for opening up lines here. Knight back, f4, king f7, f takes. And we get this position. I'll race through it. There are some sidelines. And white is slightly better, but it is important to note here that, of course, black is up a piece. So for two pawns, okay, and the king is out in the open. So this is what counts in chess literature as a small advantage for white. White is going to castle probably in this position as well. Brings the rook to f1 with check. So white's aiming just to bring more and more pieces out into the game and try and then catch the king. Worst case scenario, win a couple of other pawns and maybe get a position where you've got 3 or 4 pawns for the piece. While researching this game, Bishop b3 was suggested by the engine. I haven't seen any books. There are some lines involving b5, so maybe bishop b3 is just a safety move. After c6, a3, knight a6. And again, white is slightly better to equal in this position with the king trapped in the center. But again, you're down a piece, so you've really got to prove that you've got enough play for it. It turns out, though, that black went wrong with king e8. And it just basically means that white now wins back the piece. So white sacrificed the knight on f7 to capture a pawn, but black gave back the piece for free, so white is just up a pawn. And as well as the king having moved to f7 and back means that the king can't castle, so getting to safety is now a challenge. And finally, with the f pawn missing, bad things can happen. And in fact, white is already threatening, obviously, a checkmate in one here. So queen f6 got played, bishop takes, pawn takes. You could play queen h5 check here, but it just encourages g6, and then you go back to e2. So white just played back to e2 straight away. So white's up a pawn, white can castle, black can't. Nonetheless, both sides haven't really developed now, so it's a bit of a race. Now, a5 was played with a specific idea in mind, which sometimes works, but not in this case. Castles. And bishop a6. And as you can see, the bishop's attacking the queen and attacking the rook. And maybe the idea was when the queen moves, we get to take the rook. The drawback with this one is that you just play d3. Okay? And not only does d3 stop the bishop from attacking the queen and rook, it also lets the bishop on c1 out. While the bishop on a6 isn't doing a huge amount. So we'll develop for a bit. Knight c3. The best move here for black, certainly in this position, would be to castle kingside. But guess what? Not allowed to do that because of the king excursion to f7. King went to d7, which was a very strange move, because after check here, what do you do? If you block with the queen, queen takes g7, gets played. So the king has to move back, basically. The best square to move was the square it came from, which was e8. Instead, final blunder of the game, the king went to d8, and quick as a flash, bishop g5 landed on the board. And suddenly the queen is pinned against the king, and sensibly black decided that they'd had enough at this stage and resigned because they were about to lose their queen. So that was an incredibly quick game. And starting with the fried liver sacrifice on f7. To be honest, if you're going to study these positions, you have to study lots of these positions. It's all very well to go, oh yeah, knight takes f7 wins, but you've really got to look at, because there's lots of lines where you can actually go wrong. So that was the first game, and I'm just going to bring up the second game I want to look at now. May have to do a bit of fiddling on my screen to change the broadcast capture. So that was the first game, and I'll just find the second one now. Here we go, here we go. And bringing that one up now. And hopefully everyone can see that second one. Yep, looking good. And we've got this second game, also a nice short game, was played between Cam Cunningham and Jerry Cheng. And Jerry's been in really good form lately, but I think last night he might have been a little bit under the weather. I wasn't sure whether he was actually going to play or not. And in the end, Cam won with not a lot of effort, I must say. But nonetheless, the mistakes that were made and the advantage that Cam took, by the way, going through this game, there were no mistakes by White pretty much. White played the right move in every position, which is what you really want to try and do when you're playing chess. So it's a French defence, d5. Now, a lot of the Frenches I've been showing lately from local tournaments involve the exchange variation, taking on d5. Cam chooses not to do that. Plays knight d2, c5 to hit back in the centre, bring the knight out, knight here. And we get this strange situation where the pawns on e4 and d4 can take on d5 and c5. And early on in my chess career, I found these positions very difficult to play. I couldn't quite work out where I was supposed to capture. And even now, I'm never quite clear. For example, taking on c5 is probably not the best move simply because it lets the bishop come straight out. And then if you take and you take here, you've given black an isolated d-pawn, which you might think is good. But at the same time, two things happen. One, the bishop on c8 is now free. And two, it's not always clear that isolating that pawn is bad for black. In fact, black tends to get some good attacking chances down the open files. A debate, by the way, that's gone on for almost 150 years now about whether it's a good or bad thing. The other choice is to take on d5, and he takes. And again, you could go for the I will take on c5, but that just transposes. So bishop b5, slightly odd move, because after queen e7, you've got two choices here. One, you retreat the bishop, which kind of goes, well, why did I do that in the first place? And after knight f6, there's plenty of play for both sides. Or you could play king f1. I'm not a fan of this because it traps the rook in the corner, but there might be a reason. And then we play knight here, attacking the pawn. So by making the queen go to e7, you're kind of blocking in your own bishop on c8, and maybe this is the idea. After c4 to attack the knight, then you've got knight a5, and because the knight is pinned on c6, you are causing some difficulties. And then maybe, yeah, something like queen to c7 to protect things. But you can kind of do a bit of damage to the pawn structure. But again, this is one of these sort of messy positions that maybe neither side was that keen on playing. Cam played c3, which is not necessarily theory, but does have the advantage of being safe and solid. Okay? And if you want to play a bit of risk-free chess, you can try these things. It's not the most aggressive chess, and you may not get the biggest advantage out of the position that you're looking for. But nonetheless, especially below a certain level, if you've got a choice between getting an extra 0.2 of a pawn according to computer analysis, but you've got to play only moves for 4 moves in a row, or getting a slightly less advantageous position, but at the same time it's nice, safe and solid, and you've just got to play sensible moves and not muck it up, go the sensible road. And b6 turns out to be a mistake already. I was torn between even giving this an extra question mark, because really this is where black goes terribly wrong. The idea, of course, is to let the bishop come out to the green squares marked b7 or a6, depending on, but it does weaken the knight on c6 because it's not protected anymore. And Cam immediately pounced with bishop b5. In and win. Okay, which is, always good advice. So bishop b5 and bishop b7. It again may well have been better to play something like bishop d7 so that the knight isn't pinned and can move. But after e takes, castles, knight f6. Rook e1 check is incredibly irritating because you block here, and then queen e2 actually stops black from castling in the short term. Because if black does castle, white just simply takes the knight on c6, and the knight was protecting the bishop on e7. And after we take here, we've just won a piece. So that doubling those pieces down the e-file just picks up the piece if black is foolish enough to castle in this position. But after bishop b7, the knight can't move. So castles, very good. And now was the time for, I think, black to pose the question to the bishop with a6. We take, and we play knight e5, and we play bishop e7. And white is still better in this position, and white is still better for one pretty obvious reason. Just count the number of pieces that have been developed for white and the number of pieces that have been developed for black. Black has moved the bishop to b7. White has got a knight on e5, a knight on d2, and castled. So black has spent too much time moving pawns and not doing anything with it. White has got the lead in development. Instead, queen c7 got played, and then after taking and taking, we get our old friend rook e1 check again. So we have to block. Bishop e7 is probably better because at least the knight can go to f6. But after knight e5, knight f6, bring the knight over. And again, castling turns out to be a blunder in this position because we capture twice on c6. And the last capture means the queen, which was defending both the bishop on e7 and the knight on c6, has to choose what job it's now going to do. And white just picks up another piece. And white is a piece ahead again. So knight g7 avoided that, but the problem with knight g7 is now you've got two knights pinned. You've got a knight pinned on c6, you've got a knight pinned on e7, and both of those knights are in the roads of bishops. So those bishops are completely ineffective while the knights are pinned. Knight e5, sensible move in this position. And black went, well, I can't leave the knight there. Maybe I can free my position by offering the exchange. So the idea after f6 is that we capture twice on c6. And then once those pieces come off, black is actually not in a bad position. But f6 makes the mistake of weakening this diagonal here. And again, as I said, Cam played a really good game here. Queen h5 check. If the king just goes to d8, which is the only other, move, not quite, knight f7, and we're attacking king and rook, and we're going to win. King and rook. g6 was played in the game. The only other move you might want to think about is knight g6, except you don't want to think about this because there are a number of good moves in this position, including simply knight takes g6, and we just have a discovered check down the e file. You can probably even just play knight here as well with the same idea if you really wanted to. So g6 was played, but of course knight takes g6 happens here because the knight can't capture because of, as I said, the pin. And if the pawn captures, which by the way was probably the best move, we just take the rook. Okay? And after king f7, knight f3. But white is well and truly in front in this position as well. I mean, not super duper winning in every line because it's only an exchange, but it's a rook and a pawn versus a knight. So that's a good 3 points advantage anyway. And the king is sitting out on f7, ready to get checkmated. So instead, rook g8 got played, but it just all went to pieces now because knight takes e7 is a discovered check from the queen. So the king can't, or the bishop can't, well, certainly the bishop can't take the knight, okay, because the king has to move. So the king wandered off there, and then white just took the rook. So now white's a rook, a knight, and a pawn up, and the game is essentially finished. Black could play bishop d6, but after knight f6 check, it's just getting worse. Rook d8 was also played, but after queen f5 here, there's going to be a checkmate in next move because the king can only go to d6, and then the queen goes to e6 with checkmate, and it's all over. And as much as it all went wrong around about here, right, d6 was really the early start of the decline of black's position here. Just, yep, weakened too many squares and just allowed white to take an advantage simply by playing nice, sensible pin and win type moves. You know, a pin here, a check here, okay, a centralization move here, and suddenly the game's almost finished. Well, so they were the two games from last night's standard event. Both very quick. That's why I've shown two of them. They're both 15 moves each. But it was an example, not necessarily of one player doing something massively clever, but essentially playing sensible chess, following the principles of development. And then when the opponent made the mistake, they were well placed to take advantage of that mistake. So my name is Sean Press. I run these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. This event, the standard one, is still going to keep running even if the chess clubs get back, because there are, I think Thursday night's a free night on the Canberra chess scene, so we'll keep running these ones. But for our other events, if they clash with club nights, we're not going to run them. So I'll find out when Tuggeranong's going back, because there may not be a blitz next Monday night. There certainly won't be an online street chess, and there won't be an online rapid, but there will be the online standards at least running for the next few weeks. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll be seeing you later.